My name's Jade from the Sydney Basin Koala Network. Before we kick off, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Gadigal country and extend my acknowledgement to the country where you're calling in from today. We're here to talk about what councils can do before the upcoming, for koalas, before the upcoming election. And while it's an opportunity for myself and Kirsty to share information with you, there's also a lot of people in the room who are very knowledgeable. So it's always great to hear about what's going on across the Sydney Basin. Everyone's got such great knowledge of what's happening on the ground in their area. I'm going to give a little talk about what councils can do in general and show you the policy that the Sydney Basin Koala Network has put together. Then I'll hand over to Kirsty, who will talk a bit about Koala Beach, which is really exciting. As I said, I'm Jade from the Sydney Basin Koala Network, which is a project of the Total Environment Centre and WIRES. So the simple reason we're all here today is because we care about these guys, right? We care about koalas. And we know that they're in need of help right now. We published a report earlier this year with some analysis done by BioLink that showed the extent of occurrence, which is the geographic range, the generational persistence, which is a measure of long-standing breeding populations, and the area of occupancy of koalas across the Sydney Basin is in decline. We had a question on sign up about the number of koalas in the Sydney Basin. It's really difficult to put a number on a population of koalas. However, the trends in population can tell us a lot. And that's why we looked at these three statistics, and it's not looking good. Koalas in Sydney Basin are in decline. So we know we need to do something now. So the purpose of this webinar is because the local council elections are coming up on the 14th of September. And it's to share knowledge about what local councils can do in protecting koalas. I just want to make a disclaimer at this point that the Sydney Basin Koala Network does not endorse any specific candidate or party. The purpose of this webinar is to equip you with the tools and resources so that you can make your own informed decision in the upcoming election. So local councils or local government areas, LGAs, they can either be divided into wards or they can be undivided. And if you're in an undivided council, you would elect councillors for the whole area. If your council has wards, you would elect councils for your ward. Councillors are elected for 4 years, and mayors are elected by either councillors or by voters, and then they hold office for either 2 or 4 years respectively. There's a lot more information on this on the New South Wales election website. There's a web link at the bottom there, which has information about all the different electorates. It's just a bit of a general overview. So we do have a bit of a complication with our legal system in that we've got these 3 levels of governance. We have local council, state government, and then federal government. And essentially, we need all of these different levels of legislation to work together to protect koalas. There are some times where the legislation interacts. We'll see that later when we look at the SEPs in a bit more detail. But for the purposes of this webinar, we are focusing on what local councils control and what they can do because of the upcoming election. So I know there is some issues at some of the other levels, at state and federal, but we are focusing on local council stuff at the moment. We have put together a local council policy guide, and it covers these 7 topics, and I will go through them one at a time. So the first is the biggest one. We're talking about comprehensive koala plans of management. I know some of you know a lot about this, so do bear with me, and there might be some people in the room that don't know much about koala plans of management, or CKPoMs as they're referred to. So yeah, we'll go through this. So first of all, what is a CKPoM, or a comprehensive plan of management? Essentially, it's a landscape level koala plan of management covering all or most of a local government area. It identifies core koala habitat, and it sets out specific conditions for planning proposals on core koala habitat. This is really important because when you take a plan at a landscape level, you can look at landscape level features, which includes things like habitat connectivity and corridors, which often get overlooked when you just look at individual assessments that can lead to incremental impacts or cumulative impacts. The other really important point is that there are certain legal frameworks that define koala habitat as koala habitat mapped in a CKPoM. Therefore, if a local council area does not have one, as in does not have a CKPoM, then core koala habitat in the area is not protected by those legal frameworks. It also allows your council to impose planning controls, and it can also increase their ability to get funding for certain things. So just importantly, I want to just reinforce that when councils do not have a CKPoM, legal safeguards for core koala habitat do not work to their full extent. So there's an issue that they are voluntary. Koala plans of management are voluntary for councils to put in. And this map here on the right shows the Sydney Basin. All the shaded areas in the sort of light brown colour are covered by the Koala SEPs, which is a state environment planning policy. And the blue dots are all the koala sightings. So you can see there's koalas all across the Sydney Basin, yet only 2 councils in the Sydney Basin bioregion have a koala plan of management. So that's Campbelltown and Port Stephens in the purple. So that's just with the koala sightings back on. You can see there they obscure it a little bit. So someone asked if the Blue Mountains has a koala plan of management. They do not. If you are not in Campbelltown or Port Stephens, your council does not have a koala plan of management. If you're in one of the shaded areas, your council, any development in your council area does need to create an independent koala plan of management, but that, as I said before, does not see those landscape level features, so can lead to incremental impacts. So some of the eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that some of the areas are not shaded and are white, but still have koala sightings. So the reason I'm talking about SEPs, which are state environment planning policies, is that koala plans of management must be made under a state environment planning policy. There are issues with the state environment planning policies, the SEPs, namely that there's 2 of them and they don't cover all the councils that have koalas. We will talk more about this later because this is an example of where the state government interacts with local government, but I just wanted to highlight it at the moment. So one of the things that a koala plan of management does is it identifies core koala habitat. General procedure for this basically covers 3 steps. Vegetation mapping, so mapping the different plant community types, mapping past koala populations through analysis of records, and then mapping current koala populations, including field surveys. So if we look at this first one, I just want to point out that as well as forming the basis of your koala plan of management, fine-scale vegetation mapping is really valuable for so many things in a local council, from agricultural planning, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity conservation in general, environmental monitoring. It's a really useful thing. It's basically knowing what's on the ground across your area, and it can help your council make better decisions across a whole range of areas. So there's no reason councils can't do this. But how can they help koalas? So the other thing your KPOM can do is put in certain controls that would apply to planning and development. So for example, you could be required to retain koala food trees and shelter trees, ensure that swimming pools are koala friendly and have escape ramps and ropes, restrictions on keeping dogs, ensuring that fencing allows koala movement in residential areas, and having roads that are slow and with road calming devices, or speed limits of 40 kilometers an hour in residential areas. So these provisions are all to ensure that koalas have habitat and can move freely and safely across the landscape. Why is that important? Well, free and safe movement, also called connectivity, is important because healthy koala populations are dynamic. Koalas move around the landscape for breeding and dispersal, which is important for genetic diversity. They need to be able to move if the climate changes, to find more suitable habitat, or if there's a bushfire, just to find resources and to find mates. So it's really important, and it can be impeded by roads and vehicle strike and dog attacks and habitat fragmentation. All things that happen with urban development, for example. This is just a little example of a koala who moved about 60 kilometres in 4 months from Mulgoa up in Penrith down to Mowbray Park near Picton in Wollondilly. And it just shows you that they really are moving across the landscape. This was a dispersing male. And if we just zoom into this area, I just want to show you an example of what happens if we don't protect our corridors. So this is Warragamba, and here the koalas move from the north down through this strip of habitat here and across and down. They can't come across here because there's a fence. The Warragamba Dam is fenced off. So you can see this was in 2011. There's habitat that comes down and connects across. However, in 2024, this year, you can see what's happened. Several developments have cut off this corridor and blocked it. So side by side there, you can see in 13 years how it's changed. Why did this happen? Basically, cumulative developments and lack of a landscape level protection plan for this corridor left it vulnerable. So yeah, corridors are places where koalas live, and they use them to disperse across the landscape. And basically, the wider, the better, and the more connected, the better. Mapping your corridors as part of a CKPoM can protect connectivity at a landscape scale. I will point out there are shortfalls of CKPoMs, which I'm sure some of you know all too well, and we will talk more about this later. For now, we're going to move on to roads and vehicle strikes. So, as we've just spoken about, connectivity is vital for a flourishing koala population. But if you think about our landscape, it's completely cut across with roads. This has a huge impediment on koala movement and connectivity. When we think of the impacts of roads, we often think about road strike, but there's lots of impacts. So, loss of habitat directly from construction of roads where trees are cut down, but also indirect from areas around the roads that become unlivable due to light and noise pollution. Loss of connectivity, which we've already spoken about, isolates populations and cuts them off from resources, mates, and suitable habitat. Stress from injury on roads or noise and light pollution. And of course, there is road strikes. We know from a study by BioLink that loss of just 2 to 3% can cause a population to decline. We know it's bad. This is just southwest Sydney. In an 18-month period, there was 63 recorded koalas killed, and that's just the recorded ones. So we know it's really bad and we need to do something. Road strike mitigation must include safe road crossing. The koalas are crossing these roads to get to other places. So just simply fencing them off from the roads is just a band-aid solution, which doesn't even always work. If you just fence where a hotspot is, they'll move down the road and there'll be a new hotspot at the end of the fence, or they'll wait until there's holes in the fence, then get stuck in the transport corridor, which has happened on Picton Road where fencing got put up. So what can councils do? Well, they can work with local communities, especially wildlife rescue volunteers, to identify and monitor road strike hotspots. They can reduce speed limits on council roads at hotspots. They can map habitat, corridors, koala sightings, and road strikes, and use this information to inform decisions about new road design or upgrades. They can consider wildlife connectivity on all council roads and integrate into the design of new roads and upgrades, including wildlife crossings. And they can use variable signage and liaise with community and wildlife rescuers to place this signage in appropriate places. As I said earlier, they can include things in their CKPoM like road calming measures and speed limits. And importantly, they can advocate to the New South Wales Government for action on state roads that run through their LGA. Number 3 on our list is councils can support local communities and local landowners. So I'm sure lots of you know very well that local communities play a large role in koala conservation. And community education can foster community knowledge and custodianship of local koala populations. It can raise awareness about koala movements. When people understand what's happening, they will know to drive slow at dusk and dawn because they're aware of koala movement. And it's really important that the community does know what to do when they encounter a koala on the road, or if unfortunately someone does hit a koala or other wildlife. More people reporting their koala sightings can increase data, which is really valuable to then feed into decision making. Again, arming people with knowledge and knowing what to do can encourage the use of koala-friendly fencing and swimming pools and increase responsible dog ownership. And it can also bolster habitat restoration through community planting projects. So there's lots of things that local communities can do with the support of local council. Local landowners also play a big role. Lots of the koala habitat across the Sydney Basin is found on private land. So many habitat corridors run through state, local, privately owned land, and we need seamless connections across these land tenures. So by fostering supportive partnerships with local landowners, local council can encourage and incentivize protection and restoration of koala habitat. This can be really important for making sure that there's connectivity across the landscape. I should just say that that koala there was spotted on private property in Bowral. So yeah, they don't know who owns the land, and they just follow their habitat. Of course, councils are responsible for assessing development applications. So council assesses and approves development applications in their local government area. But actually, in order to get a DA approved, it has to meet the planning controls in a council's local environment plan, in their development control plan, and in their comprehensive koala plan of management, if they have one. So council has a role here. They can ensure their local environment plan, development control plan, and CKPoM provide adequate protection for koalas, and then the council can more stringently assess the DAs and then reject any that would negatively impact koalas and their habitat. Number 5, opting out of the Rural Boundary Clearing Code, the RBCC. So if you haven't heard of it, the Rural Boundary Clearing Code was introduced by the New South Wales Government after the Black Summer bushfires. It was not one of the recommendations of the bushfire inquiry, and peri-urban councils had to opt in. Where it applies, it allows local landholders can clear 25 metres of bushland along their property boundaries. And despite lack of evidence that it reduces fire risk, it does override a range of existing state legislation aimed to protect the environment. This is from the RFS website, and this is an example of how the RBCC may apply to your holding. However, some lots are quite small, or even big lots can be narrow. And if you have a narrow lot where one edge is only about 50 metres, these can be completely cleared by 25 metres on either side. Boundary clearing lots of adjacent lots can cause wide-scale clearing. So the impacts for koalas are that it overrides environmental protections. This is an example of where I said earlier that CKPoMs sometimes interact with other legislation. So clearing of koala habitat is only protected when an LGA has a comprehensive koala plan of management, because the Rural Boundary Clearing Code says you cannot clear core koala habitat identified in a CKPoM. Now, as we saw from that map earlier, very few councils across the Sydney Basin have a CKPoM, so essentially koala habitat is not recognised by the RBCC as it stands. Councils themselves some of them have admitted to not having the resources to monitor and enforce the rules of the RBCC, leaving it open to misuse. And clearing of many adjacent small lots can effectively clear cut large areas which obviously can cause habitat loss, and depending where those areas are, can fracture corridors. This is just an example of how koalas are vulnerable because of voluntary mapping and implementation of CKPoMs by councils and lack of enforcement by councils of existing legislation and rules. Which brings us on to the next point, which is monitoring and compliance. So we all know that environmental protections are only effective if they are adhered to. So councils could improve outcomes for local koalas by increasing the monitoring and compliance for example, unauthorized tree removal and for roaming pets. So they could choose to put resources into increasing compliance for these things and have a direct impact on koalas. Now, the last one that I'm going to talk about today is advocating to the New South Wales Government. So as we've seen, there's some issues that affect local council but are under state government control. But councils have a role to play here in advocating for positive change, not just sitting back and saying this is out of our hands, but actually pushing the state government for change. So, for example, vehicle strike on hotspots on state roads. This is where wildlife crossings are really important because state roads are often those arterial roads running through local government areas where a 40-kilometre speed limit is just not really feasible. So crossings can be really important. And reforming legislation that allows zombie developments. Basically, a zombie development is a development that was approved more than 5 years ago, and then it gets started now, and it only has to abide by the environmental legislation at the time of when it was approved rather than current legislation. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is the resolution of the koala SEPs, which are the State Environment Planning Policy. There's chapters 3 and 4, which are also called Koala SEP 2020, which is chapter 3, and Koala SEP 2021, chapter 4 of the State Environment Planning Policy, Biodiversity and Conservation 2021. You don't have to remember all that. Basically, there are 2 different sets. So your local council can have either one, both, or none. Those are sort of your options. Councils such as the Blue Mountains, Hawkesbury, Hornsby and Wollondilly, as well as some others, have one SEP. So they have the Koala SEP 2021. And they're all shown in green. So if you're in one of those green councils, that's what your council has. Your local council can advocate to the state government to finalise the draft guideline and to apply the SEP to state significant development and state significant infrastructure. One of the drawbacks of the SEP and of CKPoMs at the moment is that they don't apply to certain developments. So state significant development kind of overrules the SEP. But this is not to say that CKPoMs are useless. As I said in the beginning, we need all these different levels of government to work together rather than against each other. Everyone needs to hold up their side of the bargain. So local councils have a role to play in ensuring they have a CKPoM in place, and then state government has a role to play in respecting that CKPoM and ensuring it applies to all development, including state significant development. Next, we have these orange ones. So Wingecarribee, Cessnock, Port Stephen, they all have 2 SEPs applying, which means they cannot create, or in the case of Port Stephens, update a CKPoM for their whole area, because some parts of the area have one SEP and others have a different one. So they cannot create a CKPoM that covers their whole area because it has to be created under one of these SEPs. So it's really important we advocate the state government to resolve the koala SEPs by applying SEP 2021 to all zones. Thirdly, we have councils where they're not covered by any SEP, meaning they cannot create a koala plan of management. So we need to advocate state government and get councils involved in advocating state government to add all relevant LGAs to the koala SEP. I'm just going to zoom in on these yellow ones here, because what's really interesting is that all of these councils overlap with the pink areas, which are areas of regional koala significance, or ARCs. These ARCs were actually designated by the state government. So, and you can see like with Sutherland, almost the whole LGA, Sutherland's here, by the way, almost the whole LGA is covered by an ARC, and yet it's not in the state's SEP. So it's really important that we get these on the SEP. So that brings me to the end of the points that I'm covering. Sydney Basin Koala Network has created this policy guide on the role of local councils in koala protection based on these points covered today. I'll just show you it very, very quickly. So we just talk about the fact that koalas in the Sydney Basin are in decline. And then we ask candidates to commit to these 7 points, which are implementing a CKPoM, identifying hotspots and committing to action on council roads, community education and supporting local landholders, more stringent assessment of development applications. Number 5, opting out of the Rural Boundary Clearing Code. Number 6, increasing monitoring and compliance. And number 7, advocating to the New South Wales Government. So what's next? Well, we're going to collect your feedback from today's webinar and send you the Sydney Basin Koala Network Local Council Election Policy Guide. And then we'd like you to ask your local candidates to commit to the policy if they're elected. You can find a list of them. There's a register of candidates on the New South Wales election website. Then share your responses. If you get responses from candidates, we would love to hear what they have to say. Also share with your community so that other people know where the candidates stand on koalas. Obviously, then you can use this information to make an informed decision. And last but not least, we must hold elected officials to account. It's easy to promise something on the run-up to election, much harder to actually follow through afterwards. So as a community, that's our job, to hold them to account for what they promise. So finally, there's a lot local councils can do. Please present the policy to your local candidate so that we can get a positive change for koalas. Thank you. I know that was a lot of information. For now, I'm going to hand over to Kirsty.
Thanks, Jade. So thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Kirsty and I work for BioLink, and today I'm going to talk to you about an area that I'm really passionate about. It's about Koala Beach at Pottsville. And full disclosure, I actually live in Koala Beach. I love it. I think it's a really great place. And a bit of background to how I know about it. Well, first of all, I live here. But before that, my colleague and mentor actually worked for AKF at the time that they were setting up Koala Beach. So I have some kind of long-term knowledge passed down from him about Koala Beach as well. So where is it? It's actually right near the border. So for anyone that's familiar with northern New South Wales, there's the border, you go to Tweed, then there's Kingscliff, below Kingscliff there's Casuarina, and we're just below Casuarina at Pottsville, and we're not too far from the beach. And I thought I would just put in some pictures of what it's like, because often when you say you live, it is like an eco development, but it's a really cool eco development in that all the houses were built by different people. It wasn't all the one developer, so they don't all look the same. And some of the blocks can be quite large. It's kind of variable how it looks. It's got lots of nice play areas for children. It's got some really fantastic beaches. So if you take an aerial, this is what it looks like. And I thought I would just put this in to orientate you. So it was originally a grazing area. So it was the bit where the development was initially largely cleared, but not all of it. And it was surrounded by this bushland area. And the green that you can see around denotes the bushland areas. You can see the housing in there. And then there's plans to revegetate some of it. And there's some local parks and bushlands and some corridors that go throughout. So it was actually designed in a way that would have really good outcomes for wildlife. It was specifically designed in relation to koalas, but to have some really good management outcomes for wildlife. So this slide is cheekily called In the Beginning. So what happened was in 1993, this area was owned by a developer, the Ray Group, and AKF they had this collaboration with AKF and Tweed Council where the development was going to be approved, but it had to meet certain conditions. But what actually happened was AKF was talking to the Ray Group about how they could create this wildlife-friendly area, and they actually weren't that into it. And one of the meetings, my mentor Steve actually went along to that meeting, and the owner of Ray Group was actually there to talk to them, and he brought along his daughter, and they were talking about how great koalas were, and she said, "Oh, Daddy, we need to save koalas." And that's actually how it came about, was that his daughter really wanted to do it, and he wanted to please his daughter. So we're all very thankful for his daughter, because without her, I don't think this would have ever actually have happened. So the developer owned 365 hectares. And what this collaboration brought around was that 272 hectares would go to conservation, and the development would take place on 92.6 hectares. It wasn't all bushland, as I said before. Some of it was grazing land, some of it had bushland on it. There was some very strategic negotiations. What you can see down the bottom is two pictures that is actually a hill, and this hill has the best ocean views in the whole of Koala Beach. And unfortunately for the Ray Group, this is where the blossom bats were found to live, because they did extensive surveys over the property for all sorts of wildlife, and the blossom bats live in this hill, and it was decided that this would be kept for the blossom bats, and it's still there today. I took these photos yesterday. So unfortunate for the developers, because those plots are worth a lot of money, but great for blossom bats. And the blossom bats are still there today, so great thing. There are some rules about living here. So the first rule is that there are no cats and dogs. If you move into Koala Beach, you agree not to have a cat or a dog. And there is quite an extensive baiting program that goes into the bushland areas that surrounds Koala Beach in that remaining 272 hectares. And every 6 months or so, I'll get a little notification in my letterbox saying that they're about to bait. For foxes and for cats, mainly, are our major pests in this area. But so people should be very aware of that. There are speed bumps that are strategically placed around the estate, and they are near known koala home ranges when they were first mapped. The speed limit in here is 40 k's an hour, so it's a reduced speed limit. The raised fences, you can see that top picture on the right hand side. If you do decide to have a fence, you're actually encouraged not to have a fence, but if you do have a fence, you're encouraged to have raised fences 30 centimetres above the ground, so the wildlife have free movement. Now, the exception to this is obviously if you have a pool, you are allowed to fence to the bottom, but it's meant to be just around the pool area. It was decided that no food tree would be removed for development purposes. So if you look at the picture down the bottom, the largest picture on the right-hand side, this actually shows you that these trees were kept, and it's actually in the middle of a road, so they've made it into like a little midsection in the road, because the koalas use those, so it was kept for the koalas, so they could still use their favorite trees. Each house is meant to have a food tree planted out the front. It is on title that those food trees should remain in front of them. There is a restricted planting list, so you're not allowed to have things like agapanthus in Koala Beach, and you're not meant to have a whole range of species. It's highly encouraged that you grow native species in Koala Beach. There is also, when you move into Koala Beach, you have to pay more money. You have to pay a levy every year that goes to an environmental fund, and there is a committee for Koala Beach that has residents in it, as well as council staff members, and they decide how that money is going to be spent. It goes to all sorts of things. So it will go to revegetation works, and it goes to animal research, wildlife research as well. So I also think that's a really great initiative. When you go into the estate, that picture down at the bottom on the left-hand side, you can see that spray painted across the road that says no cats or dogs. Now, no cats or dogs also means in your car. You cannot drive a dog or a cat in a car through Koala Beach. It's not allowed. The roads are gazetted that you cannot do it. So that was a later implementation because people were driving their dogs or cats through. We've only had one vehicle strike of a koala in Koala Beach. It was actually done by a non-resident. It was done by a tradesperson who had a dog tied into the back of their ute, which they also shouldn't have been doing, and they're the only person that's hit a koala in this estate. We do have other vehicle strike issues, but koalas we're pretty aware of. So as I said, the levy funds research, but before Koala Beach before the first bit of dirt was turned, the raid group had to pay for research about this area. And so what happened was they radio tracked as many animals as they could get, and they tracked where they went, and they were contracted to track them for 2 years. And the actual image doesn't have the lines over it, but you can just see that the lines show you the home range of individual animals. So you can see that it's just containing all the same crosses or dots. So the largest one you can see is that green outline. And that green outline actually belongs to Arnie. And he was the alpha male that used to live here. And he was a great big male. For New South Wales, he was big. He was 10 kilos. And he was a fantastic animal. They used to do health checks on him every couple of months. And Steve said by the end of it, because they used to go up on a cherry picker to make sure his collar was right, because collars get really annoying. They need to be readjusted. You need to make sure the animal's in good condition. Radio tracking is a whole big program. And in the end, he just used to reach out for Steve, and Steve used to just plonk him on, check his collar, and set him back in the tree. It wasn't this stressful capture thing. They formed this really great bond. Now, what happens is his home ranges overlap with all these others, and these other ones here that you can see, they were all females, except some of the smaller ones were juvenile males that hadn't dispersed out yet. So the females were existing within here. They were allowed to exist within his range or overlapping with his home range, but he was certainly controlling the best trees and the biggest spots. So people often tell me that koalas live by themselves, and that's fine if you're into monastic solitude, but that's not really how it works. What usually happens is they have these overlapping array of home ranges, and they are largely solitary until it comes to the mating season, and then they can find each other very easily. And they do find each other pretty easily, and it's actually not the males chasing the females. It's usually the females coming in to the males. He will advertise. He's got this big, low, bellowing voice, and the girls will move into him. Throughout this project, they actually learned a lot. They learned that koalas were highly specialised in what they ate. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. They have these highly complex social structures. They live by rules and regulation depending on times of year and breeding and who has breeding rights, and they show strong site fidelity. And that was all built into how Koala Beach was based and why they didn't want to move down any of their important trees, and they built around the koalas rather than just making the koalas move out, which is often what we do. We just go, oh, well, they'll move next door. They don't want to move next door. It's like if someone came and knocked on your door and kicked you out, that's not what they want to do. They have strong site fidelity. They know where they live. They like to move there. It's often found in radio tracked animals that if you move them somewhere else, they'll go back to where they originally came from. It's a really common experience of people that try and move animals around the landscape. So they also, through their radio tracking, they looked at the trees that they found the animals in. And what they saw was there was 9 species of eucalypt that the koalas were found in and 16 species of non-eucs. Now, when you first looked at this data, it looked like a mess because it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But when it did make a lot of sense was when you accounted for the density of the trees. So if you looked at how many times they were in the tree and then divided it by the total number of trees that were in the area, there was clear favourites, and we find this all the time. They're clear favourites. I'm sure you all know what they're going to be. They come up time and time again. They'll be very similar down where you live. Microcorys or tallow wood, they love it. Robusta, we're very lucky here. We have huge amounts of swamp mahogany, and it's got those big leaves. It's really juicy. They love it. Lives in wet environments, and it's actually quite wet here. Parts of Koala Beach are very swampy and have the Quinquenovia forest and Melaleuca forest, where it's really wet underfoot, but interspersed with these great Robusta. It's also got grey gum, which is more up on the hills in the drier areas. And we also get a hybrid, which is a Pteridocornis robusta hybrid, and they seem to really like that as well. From what I understand, it's non-thrifty, doesn't produce viable offspring, but that hybrid they will eat really readily. We also found that how they use tallow woods varies with the season, and what seems to happen is the males control the tallow wood. So his home range is defined by the best bits of tallow wood, and when it's breeding season, he allows the girls to come in. And otherwise, if they're not interested in him, he's not interested in letting them into the tallow wood. So when it's not breeding season, the girls eat far more grey gum than they do eat tallow wood. This was all done in Koala Beach, and this has improved our knowledge of how koalas eat, where they move seasonally, greatly by doing these studies funded by the development in order to get approval. So yes, non-breeding females predominantly use grey gum over the other species, but breeding females, they will choose tallow wood every time, or swamp mahogany. It's a great place to live, as I said. There's some really cool features about Koala Beach. As I said, the blossom bats, they have their own hill. We've already spoken about those. There's a bridge out the front, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. And that bridge under there is boxes for the fishing bats. And you can go under your canoe and you can see them and hear them. They're great. They come out on dawn and dusk and they fish in the river. Amazing bat. We are known as the curlew breeding area. Queensland curlews are considered really common. This is like the southern portion of their range, and here they're considered to be endangered. I'm talking about, we actually, on the beach, we have beachstone curlews, but I'm talking about the bushstone curlews, those ones that make all the eerie kind of screaming. Some people think they sound like a bit like a baby crying. Before the development started, there was very little evidence that was curlews here, and then more and more curlews started popping up in this area, and now it seems to be that we're just feeding the surrounding areas with curlews. We have loads of curlews. They're so lovely. They actually bred in the house directly across from where I live, and the people that live across the road put some little star pickets in because their kids like to ride their bikes through the front of their yard. So to stop the kids and the neighbours' kids riding through their front yard, they put in this little barrier, and the community, the people in our street used to stand out the front, and we used to watch them change guard because they would change guard at a regular time. Really lovely thing for the children to do. And the day they were hatching, I went out the front, and the family across the road were all sitting out the front. They're like, Kirsty, they're hatching. And they were all sitting out the front observing these two beautiful baby curlews hatching. Just an amazing, in their front yard. And their front yard looks like a front yard. It's not, it's got grass, it's got some nice natives, but it's a mown front yard that's very well used. The community in Koala Beach is ever changing. It attracts people that live here attracts loads of different people for different reasons. House pricing was one of them. The houses didn't sell very well here at first because of all the rules. So provided affordable accommodation. Also attracted a lot of ecologists or people that have an intense interest in the environment. And I can tell you that the kids that live here are very wildlife aware. Like, you'll see them ride their bikes around curlews, and they don't even give them a second thought, but they're certainly not impacting on where they are. One of my favorite stories about here is that I had just come back from a trapping trip where we had trapped a whole heap of rodents for a big project that we were doing. And the girls we have this little girl gang in our street. They're like 8-year-olds, and there's about 6 of them that all hang out together. And they came marching towards me with a box, and I was wondering what was in the box, and they said, "Oh, Kirsty, do you know? Can you tell us what this is?" And they opened up the box. They said, and it was a rat. And I said, and they wanted to know if it was a native rat or it was a bush rat. And so when they opened it up, it was a bush rat. So I had just been out with other ecologists, and one of the new field staff had been bitten by one, which is not a nice experience, and refused to get any more out of traps because they hurt. This little 8-year-old girl picked up, put it in a box, and marched it over. I said, "What do we do with that?" Well, it's a native. Let's go and release it down in the bushland. So these little 8-year-old girls toddled down, released it in the bushland. Such a lovely thing for these little tough little girl gang, these little 8-year-olds going down to the bushland to release this bush rat. It was amazing. And the kids just walk through. So there's no fences. So when people come to my house, I often have to tell them, they're like, "Oh, Kirsty, there's someone in your backyard." I'm like, "Oh, it's okay. They're just the kids. They'll just walk through because they're visiting their friends on each side." So it does have a really lovely community feel in Koala Beach. The photo is of a planting day that happened on Sunday. A nice little area got planted out. Great involvement from the council, from the people in Koala Beach, all ages. It's a really nice community feel. Oh, this is one of the cool things about Koala Beach. We have all sorts of people. One of the people we have in here is an artist, and he went to talk to the local school that's just outside, and he got the kids to draw all these pictures. And we had this bridge. This bridge was pretty daggy bridge. It always looked like pretty grotty. And he got the kids to draw these pictures, and then got them put on these, I think it's some sort of metal thing that he got them printed onto. And they look great. So now they're all over the bridge with all these kids drawing, and that's all the kids that did the drawings. So it looks great. We have lots of endangered species here. We have about 25 species of endangered rare flora or fauna. Glossy blacks fly over my house pretty regularly. We saw them on the weekend. It's really lovely that you just get glossy blacks flying over, and you can see them in the trees around. These curlews are in my front yard. I took that photo. The blossom bats, I stole that picture because I can't get a good photo. And that's my front door where the microbat was. So we get lots of different species, and they're in the community. They're around your house. If we don't only have endangered things, all these things these pictures were all taken from my house except the tawnies, which was down the road a little bit near the park. That wasn't the only one that's not taken at my house. So I'm a bit of a butterfly nut. I love different butterflies, so I'm often taking photos of butterflies. This is just a small array of things I have at my house. The curlews, that's my front porch. The king parrot just outside my front door. The koala wasn't in my yard, but I could see it from my veranda. It was in the neighbour's yard. We call this, we have a bit of a funny thing here in Koala Beach. Everyone loves to name things. So I call this Doris, but she has about 4 other names, depending on who sees her. Everybody names her something different. Annabelle, I think, is another one. As I said, I can't keep up with all the names, but there's loads of different diversity around. So you can live in a great area and lots of things will come, but you can also improve it. So we built a little pond at our house. It's just a tiny little pond, just one of those ones from Bunnings. It's got a bit of a waterfall happening. It was just a dead space in our garden. And so we put in the pond, we put in a few plants, and I've set up a wildlife camera, and I thought you might just like to see the things that came and visited my pond in a month and a half. So we've got curlews, the ducks, the wood ducks swimming in the pond, green tree frog swimming in the pond, noisy miner, we get those as well. They're native. Crows, crested pigeons, they're around all the time. This is, I just like this picture because it's mid-flight. It's a noisy firebird. A purple swamp hen. They cause a lot of destruction here. If you have a veggie garden in Koala Beach, you need to keep these guys out because they dig up your veggie garden, but they're beautiful birds, good fun. Very cute babies. One swimming in the little pond. bandicoot cruising around my backyard, eastern water dragon. Oh, another green tree frog just because I like frogs. Happy to have frogs around. Bush turkeys. Love or hate them. I quite like them. Oh, and mountain brush tails. So these brush tails we get, we're very lucky in this area. They are just a subspecies of a brush tail, but they're jet black. They're beautiful and they're big and they've got short little ears. They call them round ears or mountain possums coming to drink out of the pond. I put that photo last. It's my favorite little capture in my 6-week thing. It's a great place to live. There's always things that could be better, and I've discussed this with a few people. This is actually a picture of my bin with the little baby curlews hanging on the outside of the bin, looking at pictures of themselves. So if we did it again, we would probably advocate for bigger lot sizes. We would advocate for increased compliance from council. Tweed Council is great. We are so lucky. The mayor, Chris Cherry, is fantastic. She turns up to our Koala Beach committee meetings. She is phenomenal and she does a really great job, but doesn't always filter down. And even though we have this really great community, some of the things we suffer are like a fencing issue. So not all people have the gap under their fences. And when the tradesman comes in, I had a friend that lives down the bottom. That's actually who I took a photo of her fence. She said to the tradesman, I want a fence with a gap underneath. Because you don't need that. And she said, well, but I want it. And he said, oh, no one will care if you don't have it. And she had to push him that she wanted it. And he goes, there's no koalas around here anyway. I've lived here for 50 years. I can tell you there's loads of koalas around here. We see them all the time. So you still have to advocate even when these great things are built up. Retention of trees is also an issue. There's obviously been a few trees fall down. We need to think really smartly about planting. The grey gums in this area don't do well without other grey gums. So, but the Robusta and the microquarries are fine in the streetscape. We just have to convince a few more people. The council are really good. It's unlikely they're going to remove them. They will cut off branches if they overhang your house, but largely they'll try and retain the works of the trees. We would put in more thoroughfares for wildlife, like big bits through the middle. That would be really nice if we had just a bit more connectivity right through the housing estate. I've got in here better cooperation from real estate. If you come to a real estate at Pottsville and they show you a house in Koala Beach, they often don't tell you about the rules. And it is in the contract, but it would be great if they were on board. Most of the people that live here are really passionate about keeping it how it is. There is one place that does this, that protects koalas. There's a few other there is a few others that are more wildlife generalists, which is also great. We're the only one that does koalas, and we want to keep it this way. I've got discouraged non-residents passing through. I actually don't have a problem if non-residents pass through, but it seems to be the people that don't follow the road rules are the people that are just passing through. There is a DA to have a caravan park just outside, and the problem, we're going to put in a submission about that because it's been written in there that it's built up, it's surrounded by urban environment, so domestic animals aren't a problem. Us in Koala Beach, we would say it is a problem. We're full of curlews, we're full of wildlife. We don't have cats and dogs. We don't want cats and dogs from the caravan park coming through. And some people do speed through Koala Beach. We actually have a bit of a vehicle strike problem. Number of curlews get hit. We've been documenting them, and this is all gathering data so we can feed it back to council. We work really closely with council, and they do listen to us. We do, but it still takes pushing. It's just not a set and forget. It's not a set and forget kind of thing. But in saying that, still great. Love living here. Lots of wildlife. It works really well. Has a great community feeling to it. Oh, this is just Irene Timms has kindly let me use some of her photos. She's the president of Koala Beach. She took this photo. This is in Koala Beach. I love this photo. 1 duck per pole. And I guess I want to advocate for more koala beaches. So I think more councils should get their ducks in a row, and we should expect more from developers and get them to put in more places like this because it's really great. People love living here. The real estate here now has gone from somewhere that wasn't it was a quite cheap real estate. It's actually now sought after. The real estate prices in this area, if that's something that concerns you, have now gone through the roof. They're equivalent to everywhere else in Pottsville, and sometimes they're a bit more because we live on a hill. We're not in a flood zone. All that sort of thing has really improved the value of Koala Beach. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That was fantastic. And it really goes to show that when you design a place with wildlife and koalas in mind, it really benefits a whole host of species, including the humans that live there. It seems like it's an absolutely idyllic place to live. So I hope that gives you all a little bit of inspiration of what we could be striving for in more places. And yeah, we might not get all of that in every council this election, but it's just something to sort of strive towards, and the fact that we can always keep improving. And yeah, it was great to see that. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing that.